Hello, and welcome back to the SPF. I'm Andrew Robinson from GreenSpark Group. I would like to acknowledge our lead partners who have made this event possible, our transformational partner, Real Green, Creative BC, the Motion Picture Production Industry Association, our presenting partner, MBS Equipment Canada, our signature partners, CBC Radio-Canada and Telefilm Canada, and our Green Marketplace lead sponsor, The Green Shot. Now, over the course of this week, we encourage you to explore the event's platform. In our event feed, you'll find polls. Please head over there during the breaks and let your opinions be counted and find out who else. We're here to learn from each other. So I'm really excited about what's coming up. Next, I'd like to introduce our first panel session, Circular Economy, a Global Solution. What is a circular economy? Why are we hearing more about this? And how does it work? Well, in this dynamic discussion, our speakers are going to examine the important tenets of circularity and explore how the principles of circularity can be applied in the film and TV sector. Our moderator is Denise Philippe from the Senior Policy Advisor from Metro Vancouver National Zero Waste Council. Denise is a policy influencer with over 3 decades of experience in community education and development, city building, and land use planning. She currently helps lead the National Zero Waste Council's Secretariat, helping to secure waste prevention through design and behavior change using circular economy principles. Her work with the council has spanned product design and packaging through to food loss and waste. Over to you, Denise. We're looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. I'm so really excited to be here and moderate this session on circular economy and really how it's going to impact film. We have 3 fantastic speakers with us this morning. Let me just introduce them quickly, and then I'll just set some scene-setting remarks to get us going. So first of all, we have with us Paul Shorthouse. Paul is a managing director for the Circular Economy Leadership Canada, which is a network of industry and sector leaders who are advancing the circular economy in Canada through innovation and knowledge sharing. Paul's expertise is focused on working at the intersection of business innovation, public policy, economic development, and sustainability. I think this touches all of us, actually. Kari Herlevi is a project director, circular economy for biodiversity with the Finnish Innovation Fund at Sitra. Here he tackles root causes of biodiversity loss, climate change, and overconsumption of resources. Kari's background is diverse and includes time spent in Silicon Valley. If you have not heard of Sitra, I really encourage you to take a look at them. They are so interesting, and so is Kari. And finally, we have Florence Nightingale. Florence is a senior consultant with the Circular Economy and Climate Change team at Arup, with over 6 years of experience integrating circular economy, decarbonization, and adaptation into built environment projects. She was really instrumental in producing the report Screen New Deal, which laid out a sustainability vision for the film production industry. And we're going to hear a lot more about that report today. So thank you, Paul, Kari, and Florence for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're located in the world. So before we begin with presentations, I just want to provide a few remarks to get us going. So many of you in the audience are familiar with the concept of sustainability, where and how it's applied in the film industry, and the degrees to which it has or has not been successful. The circular economy is a slightly different take, and our speakers are going to really talk about the differences between sustainability and circular economy. But know this, the world is becoming more circular, with attending policy and regulation to make this so. Businesses and governments from cities to nations are being pressed into having to make change in how we use natural resources as our world honestly continues to heat up, burn, and flood from climate change. Many of these businesses are your businesses. They are involved in films that are produced and enjoyed. Many of the governments that are making changes are the places in which film production happens. They set taxes, they set fees, they provide funding, they provide site location infrastructure, and a lot more. The circular economy is not a niche movement for the select few. It's actually happening now worldwide as a necessary response to addressing climate change. And it will need to become the norm under which all economic activity happens. And we know that film is really a business activity as much as it's a creative one. For the film industry to continue to thrive around the world, it will need to understand and embrace circularity, as it will eventually see it around every corner, in every studio, and in every site location, really. Part of our discussion today will also be about where the circular economy and imagination intersect. So not just in how creative we can be in the industry in terms of how we use resources and manage relationships, but really also in how we tell a story and who sits at the table to shape a narrative. So I started off this introduction with a rather gloomy context of a globe amidst a climate crisis. But the circular economy isn't just a defense mechanism. It's also one that holds enormous potential to shape a truly desirable and prosperous future. So I really do want us to start off this conversation today on a note that is hopeful, that's looking at opportunities, that change is a positive and great thing. And we are really looking at transformations in jobs, community design, cultural identity, even social narrative. So this conversation we're going to have today is quite broad and far-reaching. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. Paul, I'm going to have you start us off. So Paul, over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Denise. Great sort of context-setting remarks there. I'm going to share just a few slides here with the audience to really frame up and define a little bit circular economy and the principles behind which so much of this is underpinned. So I'm just going to start by sort of describing our current state. And really, we live in what's been termed a linear economy. So we extract resources, we make something out of them, we use them for a while, and then most of the time we dispose or dump them into the environment. Of the 100 billion tons of raw materials that are transformed every year into products, about 2/3 of those end up back into the environment as waste or pollution. So that's garbage in the landfills, it's plastics into the ocean, it's carbon dioxide, which is the waste byproduct of burning fossil fuels back into the atmosphere. And really it's the root cause behind really our three major environmental crises we're facing today. And it also has a big impact on social inequality issues. So the thing that gets me most excited about circular economy is really that it presents an economic opportunity by recapturing some of the value of these materials and resources. And just for example, the United States dumps $10 billion worth of materials and resources into the landfill every year. So we need to get better, and the circular economy model really has come to the forefront as the solution for moving away from this linear model and providing actionable business strategies. It's underpinned by three key principles. So the first one is to rethink, really reduce resource consumption, design out waste and harmful chemicals and pollution from our products and services. Secondly, it's about optimizing. So how do we keep our products and the components within them at their highest value and in use for as long as possible while minimizing their material losses? And then lastly, it's about regenerating. So preserving ecosystems, regenerating nature, and opportunities to do that also impact obviously on carbon sequestration and other opportunities in that space. So really the circular economy is about bending economic activities back into harmony with nature so that growth doesn't result in environmental degradation and we can prosper sort of in a world with finite resources. So really we're talking about circular economy at sort of three scales. It's important to think about it in terms of the systems change that can happen at these three scales. So macro level is at the industry or supply chain level, or even at the jurisdictional level, states, regions, countries. At the meso level, it's at the community or the corporate level. And there you've obviously got businesses come up with new strategies for how they survive and how they thrive in sort of this revised circular economy system. And then lastly, it's at the micro level where products or individual consumers make decisions and where products are sort of designed as sort of on the ground. And when we think about circular economy, we can think about it from waste perspective. And really it's less about waste management and recycling and more about designing out the concept of waste altogether from our products and services. And when I speak to waste, I'm thinking about it from the context of circular economy in four different ways. So wasted resources, which is where we're using materials or energy that can't be continuously regenerated. Secondly, wasted assets. So where products or assets sit underutilized a lot of the time. For example, cars that sit parked for 80% of their life, or buildings that sit empty for when they could be used for different purposes. Thirdly, wasted life cycles. So where we have the premature end of use of products, given the lack of repair or maintenance or reuse. And lastly, wasted embedded value. So the materials or the components or the energy within our products are not recovered at the end of their use. So there's 5 business strategies, circular business strategies, that have been really proven to help us capture the full value of our resources and address those waste issues or those waste opportunities. The first one is circular inputs. So that's a business model where you use renewable energy. You have bio-based products like wood that can be used in construction, or natural fibers in textiles and clothing, or potentially completely recyclable materials as inputs like recycled plastic. Secondly, sharing platforms. So that's a business model that involves increasing the use. That's through collaborative models for sharing and community access of different products and services, often on the back end of a digital platform. Thirdly, product as a service. So that's a business model where a product or an asset's ownership is retained by the manufacturer or the owner over the long term in order to increase its productivity. So there's examples of innovative leasing models for tools or equipment or even clothing in some cases. The fourth is product or asset use extension, and that's the business model that's focused on extending the lifetime of a product or an asset through repair, through maintenance, through upgrading, or through resale. And lastly, resource recovery. So a business model that's focused on recovery of those usable resources at end of life, and that's through all sorts of different ways, like deconstruction of buildings, for example. And then we're seeing, as Denise touched on, this real global groundswell of corporates, of NGOs, of governments recognizing circular economy as this model to responding to our global crises. It's a $4.5 trillion economic opportunity by 2030 that's been identified. And we're seeing global companies embracing circular economy to help action their net zero targets. So big players like Google and Walmart and Philips and Apple and BlackRock. And we've also seen the investment community come on board. So a 10-time growth in the number of private equity funds focused on circular economy just in the last 5 years. And really the policy drivers here are climate, their biodiversity, their water issues, their resource scarcity issues. We're seeing new legislation and regulation that enables that, from extended producer responsibility, where the manufacturers retain the ownership of their products for the lifetime. We're seeing fees and taxes on landfills or on virgin materials. We're seeing bans from landfill, like single-use item plastics or organics. We're seeing, more opportunity to support recycled content in the products, or the right to repair products. So that's the opportunity to have, different parts available for a product to be repaired over a 10-year period, for example. And lastly, procurement is a real driver here. And the investment community, as I mentioned, is moving in this direction, and it's really about addressing supply chain risk and transparency and aligning with ESG and UN SDG goals, for example. So maybe I'll stop there. I'll pass it back to you, Denise, and happy to take questions down the road.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That was a really great overview, and there's so many threads there that we can follow and unravel as it pertains to the film industry. But right now, we're going to pass it over to Kari to really talk more about circular economy and the global state, and as well as what's happening in Europe. Kari, over to you.
Thank you, Denise, and greetings from Helsinki, Finland. So it's a pleasure to be and talk about circular economy, also in the North American context. So I will share you some slides also from my side and start from the European perspective first. If I start from the, let me see, hold on, yeah, it should be now the right one. So basically, if we talk about the European context, there is actually quite a strong strive towards circular economy in Europe. And one of the goals is to make sure that we have only sustainable products in the EU by 2030. And that will also include things like empowering consumers to have, for example, right to repair of different products, and of course public players to make sure that they are buying sustainable products and circularity is integrated in the bidding processes. one of the key things that we see happening at the moment is also that the focus on certain sectors like electronics and ICT, definitely battery recycling and vehicles at the moment is a hot topic in Europe, not to mention, of course, plastics, textile, and built environment. So basically, of course, one of the key things is to ensure, like Paul mentioned, that there is less waste. And definitely it's about in Europe and also internationally that how to engage communities, regions, cities, and of course individual citizens to push towards circular economy. We at Sitra, we have created, for example, the World Circular Economy Forum, which we were hosting with Canada in September. Almost 9,000, I believe, decision makers gathered together, and this is really like Denise said, it is an international movement at the moment, and very much about also the business opportunity. But if I just tackle one other example, and that's really about what kind of skills are needed when we think about circular economy. We have investigated in Europe in 5 countries what is really needed from the skills point of view. I think this relates to film industry also, like in any other industry at the moment, that there is a high demand for creative skills. For example, how to design sustainable products and services, and definitely how to create digital platforms that you are able to share second-hand goods and make sure that industries can piggyback other industries' production services, and definitely about skills related to repairing and maintaining goods. And also infrastructure. For example, reverse logistics is an important part when you think about how to make it very efficient from the circular economy perspective. So it's very fascinating, and one thing that we have noticed is that industries don't know exactly what kind of skills do they need in their core business and how to make that happen. And we have focused at Sitra to provide, for example, playbooks for industries to make that transition to happen. I would like to conclude with one example that we have from Finland. I was thinking that what to present in this kind of conference, but I came to the conclusion that the case Creasus is maybe the most relevant for this audience. And it's about creative industries as a whole. So it's not only about film, it's music, it's arts. And there is a kind of group that has been forming Creasus for creative industries and really start to promote circular economy and the best practices in Finland. And it has just been started, so this is not, it hasn't been for long so far, but it has created positive movement in the industry and challenged people to think about circular economy in their respective businesses. And what they are really looking at the next step is to find right tools for transition. And there is another example that is directly in the film industry from Finland. There is already a guidebook how to make ecologically sustainable operations in the Finnish audiovisual industry. And it has like practical tips and points to kind of make it sure that there is a greener production culture in Finnish film industry. And I think one of the key things when I was examining the toolkit was that there is a very strong focus on production design and how to make that in the first place very sustainable and also include visual supports. But I can talk later more about that. But thank you very much for the opening part.
That was great, Kari. Thank you. And actually, Kari, I'm going to encourage you to put in the chat some of those resources, maybe a link to Creas, maybe a link to the Finnish AV work if you can. Because today's conversation is, we're having a discussion, but we want all of you that are listening today to take away some of those resources and then think about how you apply them back home. So with that, Flo, we're gonna move over to you. I feel like you're gonna have some really great, tangible, immediate connections to the film industry. Over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So yeah, lovely to be here. Just to introduce myself, I'm Florence Mansfield. I'm from the Climate Change and Circular Economy team at Arup, which is an engineering and design company. And one of the main things I'm going to talk about is, I'm trying to do my slides, but are they coming through?
Not yet. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Getting used to it. So one of the main things I'm going to talk about today, as Denise said earlier, was the Green New Deal project that we undertook. So this had a sort of global focus. The sort of purple slide in the bottom kind of shows the title page. If you Google it, you can access it very easily, but I can also provide a link. But this project created a sustainable vision and roadmap for the film industry. And so a big part of that was thinking about circular economy and circular economy interventions linking to film production. And so I guess I wanted to start from a place of what are the main drivers for change? Like why do we want to focus on circular economy in the film industry? And I guess one thing that is that film production can be at times highly wasteful, and due to the nature of set design and filming and location filming, there's a lot of waste and there's a lot of time pressure. So there's also a building awareness within the audiences, within the talent that are involved in production, and within investors as well, that film production needs to be more sustainable, and certain circular business models need to be adopted to kind of move in that direction. One other thing, I guess, in terms of drivers for change would be there's been a huge surge in demand for filmed content. So, Netflix and all the different various platforms, but also lockdown hasn't helped that people are just consuming in such a different way than they used to. So on the right, it's already been touched on, but I kind of like this diagram. It shows the move very simplistically from the linear economy where we are now into sort of a recycling economy that in itself is not actually that much more beneficial. You're reusing, but you're still ultimately creating waste, to a circular economy where there's no waste, there's just resource, and everything is put back into that cycle. So if I go on to the next slide. So I guess the two main things that I wanted to just draw out. So when trying to implement effective circular economy measures, there are two things you need. The first one is to really, really understand the system or the ecosystem that you're looking at. And so for this project, the spider's web of diagrams was done on multiple layers of parchment paper, and it was trying to identify all the different services and connections and stakeholders that are going on. And so we kind of plotted each one on a different layer. And then the diagram on the bottom right shows a kind of cleared, simplistic overview of all of those various different connections and flows, because we need to understand how material is flowing, how resources are flowing, how the different energy, water services are being delivered. But then also you've got your studios, and then you've got the two outer spheres, you're filming on location and your post-production. So understanding how these map together is really important. And then the second thing, once you have that mapping, is quantifying those things. So putting numbers to them and understanding the problem. So looking here, this was sort of an average film production where we were able to get data and create an average carbon footprint, and then also break it down to percentages. And the reason this is so important is to identify your areas of need. So, you could maybe think that, say, air travel would be really substantial if you're flying people around the world, whereas this kind of showed that 50% is fuel, which is just your land-based travel and your generators and things like that. So it kind of, you then identify your circular economy initiatives that target that first. So then the last slide is the transformation opportunities. So I would encourage everyone to look at the report itself, because underneath each one of these buckets, we have multiple kind of specific interventions. But our main topics looked at, if I go from the red one on the left and round quickly, so production materials, so thinking about the sets and the set design and all the props and the costumes, and how we need to create a sort of more sharing infrastructure and sharing system. use things like warehouses to store materials. And as I think Paul touched on earlier, things like design for deconstruction of sets. So you take them apart and reuse them. They don't just get all sort of striked. Next one, energy and water. So thinking about reducing the energy demand of locations, studios, things like passive design, and rainwater harvesting. Moving around to orange, you've got the studio site. So this is more kind of built environment. So retrofitting buildings, using studios in adaptable ways for services that you need, using the business models like products as a service, which Paul mentioned as well. Whizzing around production planning. These are kind of thinking about the tools, the systems and the processes that go into film production and making a lot of them virtual rather than kind of relying on a lot of transport and sort of moving from one place to another. And then lastly, studio buildings and facilities. So these are the actual sites themselves. So using sensors and BIM and to sort of make them as effective and resource efficient as possible. So that was a really whistle-stop tour. I'll stop there, but can definitely go in on questions in more detail.
Okay, thank you, Flo. And if you could put in the chat that resource as well, that would be great. For all of you watching today, I think it gives you some fantastic solutions and some real details around how to implement solutions within your own production. So encourage you to take a look at that. We do have a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to come back to those. For those of you listening right now, if you could feel free to use the chat as a way to present questions to our panelists. I'm going to just come back and try to do a little bit of unpacking of our three presenters, because I feel like each one of you presented a ton of information in a short amount of time. And I think we need to kind of Kari's laughing, right? It's like, how do we do this in 5 minutes? So you guys all gave sort of examples, and you gave some nice framing around why we need to do this and how do we start to take steps forward. Let's talk about some of the challenges. So where's the rub? Where is the circular economy difficult to do and why? And if we could talk about those rubs in Canada, but globally, Flo, you might want to tackle it more specifically to industry, but I think we can really be broad. So Paul, can I throw that question to you first?
Sure. Happy to jump in. I mean, we're talking fundamentally about a system change from, the linear to circular and all the loops that bring materials and resources back into use, and also just the rethinking of business models to more service-based models and a whole range of other, shifts. And it's an exciting opportunity, but it's also challenging to move from that status quo linear approach to driving the change we need to see, and that comes with potential additional costs. It requires behavior shifts. We need incentives to drive some of those changes. I think we also have a bit of a mentality around convenience and looking for the lowest cost on things. But circular economy requires a bit of a shift to thinking about durability and repairability and the highest value for products and materials, and even shifting a little bit to like a total cost of ownership model. So that's a shift. Certainly the awareness and the information that's available in this space is not that well understood. And in North America and in Canada in particular, circular economy is often thought of as waste management or recycling. And so how do we sort of build the awareness level and help to show business cases for how circular economy is working and the return on investment. And lastly, I would say, in addition to the cost issues, are around quality and say quantity of getting materials back. And so if you're thinking about adopting a business model that enables circular economy, you want to make sure that you have enough high quality materials in enough quantity to build those into your business product or into your procurement. So you can address that quality issue through innovation, and you can address the quantity issue through collaboration. And I think those are two of the sort of key drivers for circular economy, is really a focus on innovation across products, across business models, across supply chains, and quantity around collaboration. So how do we bring partners together in unusual ways across sectors, across supply chains, even competitors in new collaborative ways?
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Kari, over to you.
Thanks, Denise. I think where the challenges come is when we have to think about how to use of natural resources in the future. We have this linear model and the kind of thinking that we have abundance of resources, but at the same time we see that OECD estimates show that material use will double or even more in coming decades, and that's not possible if we don't have circular economy. So, and there is like the kind of challenge there is that it's not only about the overconsumption, but it's about the connections to climate change and emissions, and certainly to the loss of biodiversity. So in this kind of bigger picture, there is multiple challenges, but at the same time, of course, opportunities to grasp. And if I think about the film industry, and I think in that context, if I think about the natural resources discussion, it is really how to optimize the use of materials in the film industry. And certainly it's about, similar like any other industry, it is also to design the processes in a way that the materials can be, and the products can be used somewhere else also later on. And definitely it's about, of course, minimize the waste, which is the obvious, but like Paul mentioned, it is about many other aspects as well. And I think in film industry, same, I think that you have to pilot and test before you can really say that certain circular economy models are reliable. And I think that could be a challenge in a very hectic industry. And there, I think one of the solutions for this kind of bottleneck is to raise the awareness of the positive impacts, and perhaps also have a better scheduling for pilots that last a little bit longer.
Okay, thank you, Kari. Yeah, we might come back to that notion of piloting and testing in an industry that is moving super fast. And if you don't move fast, you lose money, right? Okay, so let's come back to that. But Flo, over to you. Around where you think the rub is, where are the challenges to implementing a circular economy in the industry?
Yeah. So yeah, I think in a couple of key places. So I guess one of them is that the way in which the film industry is very unique is that what they are creating is a creative output, and there are specific ways that needs to look, and the specificities around costumes and props and sets make it very difficult to create one size fits all. And so when you think about sharing costumes, say from like one production to another, there are certain challenges around that reuse. And also when you know the classic circular economy construction principle of design for deconstruction, a lot of sets that you're looking at use materials and techniques that mean it's very difficult to take them apart and reuse them in the way they're designed currently. So I think it takes a certain new thinking, innovation approach, and by third-party like companies and organizations who supply these materials to redesign the ways in which this is done. And then I guess the other thing is for circular economy to really work, you have to have whole industries kind of working together, because you're looking across the whole life cycle of something, from the materials and the procurement through to the use of it and then end of life. And so you have to have organizations working together. They can't work separately because it needs to be connected. And I think the film industry in particular, you know, films are quite siloed. They have their own operations, their own procurement, their waste management, and so unpicking that and getting sort of shared networks across the industry is really important.
Okay, and we're going to come back to that one as well. I want to throw to one of the questions in the chat, because I think it relates, Paul, to your comment around sort of quality of materials and the importance of getting high quality materials so you can actually do the circular thing that needs to be done. One question here is, have you seen, if a product cannot be reused or maintained, is biodegradability considered a sufficient end to a product's circular economy? Paul and Kari, maybe?
Yeah, I can start there. So, you know, definitely the traditional 3 R's of reduce, reuse, recycle have been now expanded under a circular economy to sort of a 9R model. And you should always think about sort of the highest value use of those materials or resources, and the opportunity to upcycle or cascade the value of those. And, you know, down the end of the bottom end of the chain, you know, is the ability to recapture the value. So composting is one way to recapture the value by putting those nutrients back into the you know, for other purposes or for other use. But there's other ways to extract value out of organics, whether that's for biochemicals or biopharmaceuticals or a whole range of other areas there. So it depends. It's very specific to the type of product or material that you're looking at in terms of what the best use is. And there's always trade-offs that have to be considered, but composting is certainly a valuable use for organic materials. Kari or Flo?
Okay, thank you. Kari or Flo, either of you? Do you want to respond to that, or?
Well, I think Paul covered it quite nicely. Of course, there is like a lot of innovation at the moment happening in the sectors where they kind of it's not possible to reuse or recycle. So it's like the last resort waste, so to speak, how to innovate. And for example, textile is an area that we see a lot of innovation happening at the moment, where in fact with chemical recycling, it could be possible to have a brand new textile fibers as well. So even in those very difficult recycling areas, there is innovation happening at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Kari. Flo, did you want to weigh in?
No, I think I agree with everything. No,
I guess I'm just going to make a comment on the biodegradability piece, just because as a moderator, I'm your moderator, but I also work for the National Zero Waste Council in Metro Vancouver. I would, for people in film, you really need to know the infrastructure that you are, the waste management infrastructure that you're working with. Unfortunately, while compostable items or, you know, biodegradable packaging has become kind of sexy and new, and there's an uptick in trend, a lot of those materials in a Canadian context anyway are not biodegradable in the facilities that we have to process packaging or process products. And I'm not going to get into those details here, but there are some real challenges with things that are labeled compostable or biodegradable packaging, for example, or products. They're not accepted by most facilities in Canada, and that's another challenge. I think that's ahead of us. I want to pick up on Flo, one comment that you had made there in terms of the need for circular economy organizations to work together and the challenge of film often operating in a siloed way. I think this also connects to Paul's comment around the value of collaboration. So let's just unpack that a little bit, because I think we do talk a lot about collaboration. I would like one of you guys to also talk about the difference between collaboration and cooperation, and a flag to how difficult collaboration is. And then the other piece is that while an individual film may be siloed, all the businesses that are supporting that film are not just supporting film, they're often supporting other economic activities. So while a film might be siloed, I think a lot of the businesses that are connected to it are really connected in an existing economic network anyway. So can we talk about how do we collaborate throughout a value chain? Let's get ourselves out of that siloed film production necessarily, but think about all the businesses that we engage. So Paul, can we talk about collaboration? Then Flo, I'm going to throw it back to you to talk about that network.
Yeah, so you asked kind of the difference between collaboration and cooperation. I think collaboration is really about all parties sort of working together to achieve a single shared goal. And that takes a lot of effort, and it takes some finding the common ground. But, when you're working towards a crisis, like COVID as an example, plastics, pollution, those are some of the immediate crises, climate change, where it's bringing people together to collaborate and innovate in new ways. And collaboration has been highlighted as sort of one of 4 key drivers for advancing circular economy in Canada and North America, and more broadly globally. The others being innovation, investment, and policy. So collaboration, as Flo touched on, super important for the systems change that we need to see in terms of multi-stakeholder collaboration and government, cross-sector, and some really interesting examples or best practices that we've seen in the circular economy sort of emerging to sort of build that collaboration.
Okay, thank you. Flo?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the more sort of like cross-production collaboration, I think, in a lot of cases, our understanding was that productions, because of their timeline and their needs and their creative design, would sort of operate very sort of by themselves. And you would maybe have, say, a studio that had a number of different productions going on, each completely with its own logistics and waste and deliveries. And so when we were talking and thinking about collaboration in the project, it was about, like Paul said, sort of that buy-in and that sort of want to try and work together to minimize that impact, rather than the kind of the priority being working on that one specific timeline or agenda. So I think sort of buying into that, but then also if we look across the whole industry and we start thinking about how we effectively share resources and share materials, there are networks, or there's going to have to be organizations that help manage that and organize that and sort of own it. And there needs to be then buy-in from productions to sort of work with them. So sort of put extra time or resources into sort of working with those organizations that pull everything together and create the connections across the industry. Okay,
thank you. Kari, are you finding that in some of the examples that you gave already around sort of the audiovisual industry, for example, how are you finding that collaboration working? And to what degree, I would ask, is it voluntary versus regulation-led in an EU context?
Yeah, very good questions. If I think about first the overall situation of collaboration, what we see in circular economy, I think the business as usual cases are those that are innovating within the company, of company itself. I think the second stage, more advanced, is those that innovate with their customers and truly try to find the solutions that solve the customer problem from the circular economy point of view, and also have a more value chain perspective there. And the most advanced, what we see at the moment, is innovation within the ecosystem, which is of course a bit the vague word, but what it really means that there is crossover collaboration from different verticals to others, from textile to plastics, and from different type of industries. So very, very innovative, and like innovation happening in between of different areas. So in that sense, I see from the industry point of view, this is the way it's going at the moment. When it comes to more specific to the film industry, I think they are very much the same. It's I would say voluntary based in Finland at the moment, and certainly there is a need to find solutions. Of course, there is behind the EU regulation that is coming to overall to have a sustainable solution and products. So that's kind of the bigger driver there. But I would say that in Europe, it's still led by the industries and innovations.
Okay. Thank you. I want to go to the chat for a second. Oh, Paul, did you want to hop in there?
I was just going to add to that. Canada recently adopted a model for collaboration, at least in a couple areas in British Columbia, where I'm based, and in Alberta, around industrial symbiosis, which is essentially one industry sharing resources or waste as a resource with other industries, and looking at how you co-location or opportunities to share resources across sectors can provide new opportunities, and sort of a proven model in, I think, 26 countries around the world, but an opportunity potentially for film to look at industrial symbiosis as a model across sectors, across supply chains. And one example in BC, where I am, the Great Northern Way Scene Shop has been taking textiles from the clothing industry and turning it into sets by upcycling it into different design elements and that. So good example where there's some collaboration across sectors.
That's great. Thank you. And Flo, if I'm not mistaken, I think in your report, there are examples of that kind of setup where industries are co-locating, and this would be relevant for studios in terms of where studios locate and how do they share resources. Was that
yeah.
report?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think one of the kind of ideas that we suggested was I think we termed it the production business hubs, where either a studio or a film chooses its location based on the connections and the businesses available, or sort of bigger studios are able to actually provide locations for businesses. So businesses would locate themselves within the lot, and then you would have everything there. And then that kind of just makes all of that procurement and share of information and materials just so much easier when you kind of create that hub that's also accessible.
Okay, great. I want to go back to the chat. There was a question around, have you seen an effort to include engineering skills in production sustainability planning to solve issues at the root? So engineering skills would be one of them. And Flo, I believe you are an engineer, so that's a good. But can we just talk about those skills a little bit more? I know, Kari, you touched on them. Can we dive down a little bit deeper? I feel like it's endless, the skill development, and this is an opportunity, not a constraint, I would say, in the industry. Flo, can I throw to you first, and then Kari and then Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we definitely did. I think that our experience when we were engaging with production organizations was that they have incredibly skilled individuals who have worked for a very, very long time on developing sets. And so, electricians and construction and lighting, and all of those people are, absolute experts in engineering skills within film industry. I think that, the project that we did was one of the first maybe that I've heard of kind of having an external engineering organization come in and sort of try to apply, our aim was trying to apply some sort of built environment principles to the film industry. So give it that external perspective. But I think that's happening more and more in the kind of innovation and the technology. So thinking about the use of AR and virtual reality and kind of what 5G will mean to certain services, like that kind of engineering and the impact that will have as well. Definitely seeing more of that.
Okay, great. Kari?
Yeah, from my side, I think if I think about first the overall picture in circular economy, what we are seeing at the moment is that circular economy is integrated in different studies and not like having a separate circular economy expertise itself. I think that's relevant to understand because we all are, in a sense, experts in circular economy in our respective fields. And I think that's also applies to the film industry, that they have their own expertise, but they just have to integrate circular economy in what they do. What I also saw from the material that the guidebook for Finnish film industry, they pointed out that there's certainly need for additional resources behind the camera. And that's like expertise in circular economy in a way that coordinates the efforts. And what was one of the challenges was that, of course, that requires additional funding, and it is maybe a bottleneck to have that kind of dedicated expertise to coordinate films. But that's one point from my side.
Okay, great. Paul?
Yeah, I would just mention that the skills are broad, given the systems change that we need. It involves every occupation and every sort of role within the supply chain in terms of whether it's technical or trades, skills like repair, remanufacturing, deconstruction, or whether it's working with digital tools, with digital applications, as Flo is mentioning, that can help to dematerialize the need for goods. So working with BIM, for example, in the built environment to bring people together from architects and designers and engineers to work on the early stages of plans, to the business strategy side, the soft skills around communication, around business model innovation, procurement. So, the shift around procurement is around looking at services instead of products, or the focus of the product's design and its use phase and its end of life. And then lastly, I think there's a big opportunity there in the marketing and the sort of advertising side as well, in terms of how do we tell the story, how do we communicate with the consumer, and there's a skill set there that needs to integrate circular thinking into that.
Okay, so we have 3 questions in the chat, so I'm going to actually just invite one of you to respond to these questions so that we can cover them before we have to close our session today. One of the questions is, really, how do we make this information more digestible and accessible to folks in film? And it's true, this is a fairly heady conversation. Flo, I'm going to throw that to you, if you don't mind, because I feel like you probably have the better handle on it.
Yeah, so is it cheating to just say my report? I don't know.
No, that's not cheating. That's great.
I would say, yeah. So like resources that, digestible resources, I can provide a number of sort of industry standards or publications that we reviewed in the process of the project. The report itself is also kind of helpful. I think that an organization I always recommend, which isn't film specific, but the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is the kind of thought leadership on circular economy, and has kind of really user-friendly, helpful information that breaks down the 3 key principles that Paul mentioned, and then sort of applies it to products or systems or processes, and kind of is really, really helpful. So not film specific, but a good place to start would be my recommendation.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I know that Kari had also put some links in the chat. So whoever asked the question, go back and look at the chat, click on those links. Here's another question. To maximize our impact, how much do you think of the effort should be focused on adjusting the production impact versus working on the values and norms created by the film and entertainment industry? Who would like to tackle that one?
Ooh.
Paul, over to you.
I mean, I think they both have to be considered in parallel. I think obviously the production side and the direct impact from that, whether it's transportation or procurement for like catering or costumes and sets, all that has a potential large impact. But at the same time, you have to be able to drive the demand for change. And I think that comes from engaging the consumer, the audience, the people that want to see that change. And there's an education component there. There's a design aspect upstream before you even get to the production side that links into that sort of storytelling piece. So I think starting upstream and starting with the values base is probably where it's the hardest shift to happen, but it's probably going to have the largest impact in the long run. Okay,
great. Thank you. Final question here is, you can choose, question. To what extent should the depiction of circular economies on screen advance the approach more widely? So are there notable media representations of circularity which you would highlight? And Kari, I'm going to throw that to you.
So can you just in a nutshell, what would be the point?
I think that they want to know whether there are circular economy representations that are happening in film, in the media. So it's not just about what's happening behind in the production, but it's like, is the story being told on screen? And if so, where can we watch it?
Interesting. I would say that you have to create that. I haven't seen personally yet stories in that level that would be integrated in the films itself. And certainly that's an opportunity for North America as you are leading the film industry. So I would throw the challenge back that make one.
That's good. That's perfect. Okay, I love that. Okay, thank you. All right, so we're pretty much, that was it. It was fast and furious, and I think there was lots of really great suggestions, and it's a very complex topic. But I would say to all of you who are watching, I think we're past the point of, should we do this? It's more like it's coming. So how are you going to prepare, and where are you going to start? I think is the question. So hopefully you'll take a look at the resources that our panelists have shared with you to begin that journey. And I think the question more is around how do we make this easy or how do we make it difficult? So hopefully it's going to be an easy shift for you, and you definitely have resources out there to help you along the way. I would like to thank our panelists, Flo, Kari, and Paul, so much for all the insights that you shared today. You were so invaluable, so thank you. And for those of you who would like to further understand the practical application of CE, of circular economy, we do have a hands-on roundtable discussion this afternoon to explore how circularity can be applied in specific departments. So that, for the person who asked the question around how do we get more info, that's where you need to be. That is join the production designers and construction coordinators for Everything in Needs an Exit Plan, and that's at 1:15. Andrew Robinson can correct me if the time has changed. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You got the timing right. Thank you very much, Denise, Flo, Paul, and Kari. That was an excellent conversation and an exploration of circular economy. And we are called the creative industries. So as you say, Denise, I think there's no excuse why we can't be creative and tackle this issue as well. We've tackled all kinds of issues in the past. This is nothing new. So thank you very much once again. I'd like to invite now everyone that's a part of the event today to go to the next session on kickstarting sustainability on independent film. Thanks very much, and we'll see you there.
Thank you.